Hey everybody, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardin Ellis, with Cody the Oracle.
Hey, everybody.
And today we actually have a special guest in studio, one Cody Hill, who is sounding the alarm on social media. Many of you guys have actually had a chance to watch The Social Dilemma. It's cruised through American society, just like blood pumps through our veins, letting us know how we're ruining the lives of our children and frying our own brains behind our eyeballs with all of their disinformation and filthy marketing. And I'm probably botching this intro already. Cody, why don't you introduce everybody to our guest and the wise words he has to share with us?
Well, even easier. I thought it'd be Cody himself. Let us know, man. So let us know kind of exactly how you got here. And when you reached out to me, you said something very interesting. I thought it'd be interesting if you could share that as well.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. I've been a fan for a while, watched a lot of your live streams covering, politics in general and your Yang. I'm part of the Yang gang, so been a fan for a while and appreciate it. My name's Cody Hill. I worked at Facebook for about 2.5 years. I was in the belly of the beast, so to speak, in Menlo Park in the headquarters there at their Disneyland-esque campus, which is pretty wild. And I quit about 2 months ago and actually joined a startup. I moved back to North Carolina, and I'm now working on a startup that's trying to bring kind of transparency to the state political process with legislation. Happy to talk more about that later. But so I was in big tech for 2.5 years, and it was a weird world. And it just felt like something that I didn't want to be a part of anymore, especially like during COVID. I was living in San Francisco, paying exorbitant rent, working at this weird kind of frictionless environment that they've created at Facebook where, I don't know, there's a lot of off-putting things that I was seeing just with the ads business model and what it was doing, kind of polarizing our country and how it's incentivizing people to not do positive things really. And it just kind of made me sick after a while. So I felt like, why do we have all these kind of smart problem solving type people getting paid a lot of money at companies like Facebook and Google who are working, very hard to essentially give our teenagers anxiety, mental issues, and all under the guise of like being able to connect better. And so, it's not as like necessarily nefarious as that may sound, but I think the way that the business model is, there's a lot of unintended consequences that don't get talked about. And after a while, it was like, what am I doing here? I need to like try and care about something different that would actually help people.
A man of conviction.
Well, that's why one question I had right away then was you said you work for a startup now and you moved to North Carolina. Was there anything for when you first kind of moved and you got out of that, like you said, that Disneyland they had set up there where you kind of realized like, there was just behaviors and things they did there that were like, that isn't normal. People don't act like that when you leave this bubble. Is that kind of something you experienced?
I could talk for a while about the culture and like the type of people that work in Silicon Valley, but I wrote down 2 things. So the first thing is that like, there's the trope that like everyone in Silicon Valley is very left leaning and like democratic. And like, that's pretty true. So Facebook and I hired for Facebook. So I did interviews and I like hired people there. And the thing that they always harp on is like empathy. We need to hire empathetic people who are smart, who are problem solvers. And they do. Like the product of Facebook is basically allowing people from every culture of the world to connect and like talk. So you need to have people who understand every type of culture. So they really do prioritize hiring empathetic people. And so like there's that whole culture is very, empathy driven and all that. I think it kind of gets hijacked to a certain extent at some point, but like the people there are like good people. They're not like these evil people who are trying to, nefariously divide people. But I think that
well, what if we prefer that stereotype?
The way that the ad,
I said, what if we just prefer that stereotype? Can we just go back to saying they're nefarious people? You know what I'm saying? You're really ruining my wrong thing.
I think it's more of a function of kind of the business model where the only thing that's prioritized is like engagement at all costs. So you have these very empathetic people who are, very progressive, and it's like, but at the end of the day, they're all working towards one metric, which is like get people to stay on longer, get people to, hit the refresh button, get people to look at more content. And so it's like, while they all individually are these like good people, and, I don't have anything bad to say about any individual there, kind of the goals that they're working towards are all disparate enough to where they don't see how they connect and lead to a lot of negative externalities, and those don't get talked about internally. The other thing about the people, and this is what Andrew Yang brought up that I really enjoyed, was like, these are the only people who really know what's going on. They're the ones who have the best habits around cell phone and social media use. Like every Friday, we would get up from our desk and everyone starts talking about, oh, which mountain are you going to hike this weekend? Oh, we're going to go and take the kids and do this like healthy outdoor activity and no phones. And like, because they know the guts of how all this stuff works, they are very able to like put limits on it and not use it as much. So it's all the people who don't know what's going on who are getting very addicted to this stuff. And the negative effects of it are not really affecting the people as much in Silicon Valley as in the rest of the country. And that just kind of really made me uneasy.
And do you think, along those lines, just what I thought you said something was interesting there, do you think there's any, like you said, people who work in this, kind of like, you know, people would say, you know, working at a certain restaurant, like, I would never eat there, man, I work there, right? Where you can almost say where it's like people are like, dude, I know what this stuff's designed to do, I'm not going to touch it. Do you think there's any, whether it's conscious or subconscious, effort to kind of rein that knowledge back from the user, where it's like the people who work on it know, like, yeah, you don't want to be on this stuff all the time, but it doesn't feel like there's big outreach and advocacy wings all over the place. Like, it's kind of like, you know, a little blurb, remember to limit your use, but like you said, people who use it know, like, no, you should limit it, but is it almost subconscious, or what do you think?
It's an interesting question. It's saying my internet is going out, by the way. Can you hear me?
No, you're still good.
Okay, yeah. So I think a lot of it is kind of unconscious. I think everyone's very bought into the idea that like we are helping to connect the world, and fundamentally what we're doing is like a good thing if we can make that easier. I think there are definitely some people maybe who are on the like ad side, maybe who kind of because everything is so segmented there. Everyone's just concentrates on their one product. And so, for example, like there are so many products there. So like the login page, for example, like the Facebook login page has tons of brilliant people working on it so that you don't even know that there's a login page, basically. So making it as easy as possible for any time you try and do anything on Facebook, you get on it without having to take an extra step. And so those people all are incentivized to get as many people to log on as easily as possible. So they might not be thinking outside of the system that this is playing into, which prioritizes engagement. There's this one internal group at Facebook that shares like political diversity type opinions. And I was part of that. It seems to be kind of the minority of people who think kind of outside of the mainstream kind of stereotypical Silicon Valley political environment. But in general, it's a bunch of engineers. Half the company is engineers who probably don't think in this way, if you know how engineers think. And not saying they aren't great people, and then the other half is the very kind of empathetic problem solver types who are concentrated on their one product. And I think kind of putting all the pieces together, and I'm sure more people are thinking about this now, especially with Social Dilemma, but it's not a super pervasive thing inside the company from what I saw.
That's interesting. In a way, it almost sounds like you're describing like this combination of like 80s Wall Street culture and like an intelligence agency, you know, where everything is so fractured and segmented. No one knows what they're actually, like you said, like I just make the login page faster. No one knows what they're doing. And then at the same time, you have a bunch of people where it's like, it's all this money and everything's going great, but you're like, is this really like, just like you have these people that are doing wealthy, they're young, they're, you know, these, you know, the yuppies, right? Where they're like, is this life though? Just selling shares to grandmas for whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of fascinating there. And then Carton, I think you had something you wanted to ask.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, I really thought it was interesting how you said, okay, they focus on hiring empathetic people.
Yes.
But it strangely has created this system where the digital slavery is the goal. You know what I'm saying? That is now getting built by supposedly empathetic people. You know, that is ultimately the personification of that old adage that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So apparently, like, the road to digitally frying through blue light the cornea in the back of our eye until our brain does nothing than purchase the products that we see on digital ads, that hell has been paved by a bunch of self-described empaths, you know what I'm saying, that probably drive a Prius to work. You know what I'm saying? These aren't like the bad people that you see in Waterworld tossing out the cigarettes to get their, you know, their subjects all addicted. They're supposedly empathetic people. Okay, rock on, dude.
So,
I am digging this.
Yeah,
Cody.
and then quick, because I just want to get back. So then quickly, I want to get on to just specifically what it was like, kind of your like, you know, role in Facebook, whatever you can get into, whatever if you can't, and then kind of what were maybe some of those first couple things you started seeing. Maybe you kind of got bad vibes, but those first couple things were like maybe you're doing your job or whatever, where you're like, this is weird. Like, wait, what are we doing? Just in the what you're doing specifically and some things you came across.
Yeah. So I was a product operations lead there. So what I did was basically I was on a product team and I worked with the engineers. I worked with like 14 engineers and basically like analyzed data and like told them what to do and prioritize to like make sure the product quality, because there's like bugs and fixes that have to be done on these products, like thousands of them at all times that are constantly coming, because like the big engine, like the code base is so big that like things break all the time. So I basically worked with engineers to like get fixes done. And the product that I was on is a growth product. So if you think about like Facebook is basically a very simple equation. Like when the Wall Street numbers come out each month, they care about two things. They care about user growth, so how many users does Facebook have, and then they care about basically like ad revenue. So it's called ARPU, average revenue per user. So it's like the number of users times the amount of money we make per user is revenue, and that's like the biggest thing. Obviously, it's way more complicated than that. But almost every team either works towards like user growth or towards like ad growth. That's a very like simplified but pretty true framework. So my team was like user growth. And pretty much all of the user growth at Facebook is coming from emerging markets. So if you think of the world, and like the total addressable market for Facebook is the 8 billion people in the world, because they want everyone in the world to have a Facebook account. Yeah. Now, literally 50% of the world does not use the internet. So 4 billion people don't use the internet. Now, of the 4 billion people that do use the internet, Facebook already has like 2.9 billion of those people. Whoa. And so there's about 1 billion people who use the internet, don't use Facebook. Half of those are in China and they don't use because it's illegal there. So if you think about where the biggest opportunity for Facebook to get new users, it's basically just connecting new people to the internet for the first time in like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And so I was on a team that basically worked to connect people and make it more affordable to get these 4 billion people online for the first time. So it's like a very noble cause. And it's, bringing the internet and bringing connectivity to, big countries, South Africa, Nigeria, India, Indonesia. I went to the mountains of Peru and like I got to travel a lot, which was cool. And so the story for my organization was that, and it is, you can pitch it in a very like good way where it's helping people. But that's the team that I was on. But of course, there's a million stories and negative externalities that come from giving people the access to see the entire world for the first time when they don't have any like context or any know-how to be able to use the internet. So it's
well, that's really fascinating.
Good learning.
That the idea you brought up there. Well, sorry to cut you off a bit, but is there? I'm sure if there was, maybe it was a different department, but I'm sure there's some understanding that in a way Facebook's going to be almost, what's what I'm looking for? Not exploring, but introducing the whole World Wide Web to a lot of these people, right? Like you said, I mean, when you go on Facebook, you see clips from every single country. I mean, for example, there's people that probably knew very little about America being inundated with George Floyd clips if they just got online 7-8 months ago for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of understanding that you've seen in that, and the fact that, okay, we're bringing these new, potential customers to be advertised to into the ecosystem, but also if we bring them online and get them on Facebook, this is their kind of first portal into seeing the world. Is there any kind of understanding in there you've seen?
Yeah. So a couple things. So like if we're talking about like the 4 billion people who don't use the internet and trying to connect them. So the reality is that most of these people are poor, uneducated, not digitally literate. And so they really like won't see ads. So it's not like this is purely for like, so that they could show the number that we have this many billion people on the platform and we need to keep up that growth trajectory. So most of like the monetization doesn't really happen in this area. That's more so in the more developed world. But in terms of content that they would see, I mean, it's all about like the network that you have around you. So they try and get them to friend people. They try and get them to like different pages so that they have content in their feed so that they stay on for longer. And there are thoughts of like, how can we make it safe? How can we not make like misleading or dangerous stuff come up? There's been stories out about like Myanmar and things that have happened there where because of the low level of digital literacy, like people could just see a picture, unfortunately, of like a beheading or something terrible happening, and they wouldn't have any context or know what it means, and they could start like rioting. And so it's very easy to manipulate populations that have not been online for the first time. So there are efforts that are done to combat that, but I would say they much more weigh on let's get new users on as opposed to let's make it safer. It's like it's kind of a trade-off, and they definitely weigh heavier on the growth side.
And I'm be curious to see what your opinion is in terms of the batting average of benefits versus drawbacks of this connectivity. Because I got to tell you, when it comes to Facebook and social media, as a man who has lived as a missionary in a third world country, I am a mother freaking Luddite. Like I am like when it comes to this kind of thing, I am a Luddite like Morgan Freeman's character in The Dark Knight, when he just saw all of the screens and he's like, this is too powerful. And he walks out pulling the plug. Like, and the only reason why is I'll just give you two examples. And what's interesting though, is that I am a Luddite, but I am also absolutely against anything that curbs human progress. So I'm also insanely like, oh, let's get together. Let's get connected. I love that I can talk to my friends in Argentina I haven't been able to see to a decade through Facebook. You know, so it's like I'm a total Luddite who like can't stand the negative effects, but I also don't know what the alternative is in terms of replacing the positive effects. And I'll just give you two anecdotes. There's two young men I met. One, being an American, once people found out I was American, they always thought that I came from a country that had huge race issues. Like they literally thought that we were just warring like high schoolers warred in Remembering the Titans all day long. Like they didn't realize that there's plenty of high schools where we all just get along and play basketball together. You know what I'm saying? And then also forsaking their traditional values. I was on an Indian reservation, talked to a young kid who was doing, I can't remember, it was called the Eagle Dance or something. It was a traditional dance that's been in that Indian tribe for literally like 1,500 years. Okay. And he was like one of the last 8 people that knew how to do it. And I remember he came up to me and he talked and he was like, oh, dude, you're from LA. Yeah, that's where I want to go. And I want to go work for and he named like a banal job at like a tech company, not even like the dude that runs it, but just like an accountant. And he thought the idea of working for a wage in a city was the coolest ever. And I'm like, bro, you are one of 8 people that do an authentic eagle dance. And you're one of the only people that knows that. Like, you are so much cooler. But in his mind, I was cool because I was from the city. It's like, no, don't forsake this awesome, cool, traditional thing you have just so you can be what you think is cool according to what? Facebook? You know what I'm saying? And so same thing goes with, do you remember The Jungle Book, the live action version? Mm-hmm. That scene where they go and they get the honey from the cliff. That's been done for like 800 years by somebody who supposedly has to see a vision and be called by the elders to do it. That person's not getting replaced because all their youth want to go to the city. So I don't know. Do you think it seems like there's a choice between ruining a society by introducing the internet or preserving it by not? And I don't like thinking the world is that binary. Yeah. Have you seen any cultures that have been able to thread that needle or been able to become more interconnected without it just absolutely decimating everything traditional that they have?
Yeah, this is like the kind of moral and existential question of spreading the internet throughout the world.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing that I'll say is that like it is, there are 2 different worlds for sure. There is there's probably more complicated than that. But if you think of the developed world, the world that we live in, the bubble where we're always connected to the internet. Now we just know everything that we want to know at the drop of a hat. We're always just on our phones. And then there is the unconnected world where, so the incremental value that bringing someone onto the internet for the first time in rural India, like that is much more that is much better for them than the incremental value of me being able to see 5 more videos every day, like quicker. So I feel like all the improvements that are made, that are like concentrated on the developed world, are now just like hurting people more. But bringing someone online for the first time in an emerging market to where they could like now maybe talk to their relative for the first time, or they could, you know, understand what their local laws are, or have the ability to like understand very basic things like what the weather is going to be next week or tomorrow. Like stuff like that we don't even think of, but that could be much more beneficial than me being able to connect quicker with more people. So it's like, that's kind of the happy side of it. But then there is opening up the world to people who maybe have never had a screen in their house before, or who don't understand the context of like entertainment or news, or if they see something, what does it mean? It's like such a very fraught and complicated issue. So I think that like we've reached the point in the developed world where we're still working very hard at like growth and making everything like more powerful and easier to use. So I feel like that's only producing negative things in the developed world. And then in the undeveloped world, there is that needle to thread where everyone should have access to the internet, because it is good and it can help people. But doing that in a safe way, like that is a tough needle to thread, as you said. And we've never really like, I don't know if there's any examples of countries who have gone from like 0 to 100% internet penetration and done it in like a super safe and easy way. Like there's always going to be externalities no matter what. But
so here's
those are definitely deprioritized versus growth, I would say.
Yeah. So you've got some insight here, and it's so great that you were part of the Yang Gang. I had always viewed, whenever we were talking about automation and political division, as them being almost one and the same thing. We're so divided, they say now, but I don't think it's politics that divided us. I think it's actually all of these algorithms, whether they're shopping algorithms on Amazon, or whether they're, news feed algorithms on Facebook or on Twitter or on anything, saying, oh, this guy read a liberal article once, so we're going to feed him nothing but liberalism because that's quote what he likes. You know, just like Yelp says, oh, this guy went to a Thai restaurant once, and now whenever you show up to any new city, it recommends you nothing but Thai restaurants, you know? And I've always kind of felt like, to me, it's the algorithms that are pushing us towards AI more. You know what I'm saying? It's not that politics is getting more divisive. No, politics has always been divisive. It's just that now all these algorithms have figured out a way to just exponentially feed us more of what they think we want, which inherently becomes this perpetually self-fulfilling prophecy that just drives us away from each other when, ironically, it's on a platform that was meant to bring us together. So were there anything that you saw there that you thought is driving us further towards the future of robots?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. So towards the future of robots. Yeah, I mean, what tech is basically automation of processes. So like tech can go into any industry. It can go into, it's transforming like every type of industry, making it more efficient, making it quicker, bringing more cost savings. That's basically what tech is. For like social media, it's doing that to like human communication, and doing it at such a crazy rate that like our brains definitely cannot keep up. In terms of like the division, so the way that I kind of think about it is like, it's all driven by like ad revenue. Facebook is 99.8% ad revenue. So, and the way that you earn more ad revenue is that you are better able to predict how someone is going to act. So
wait, but hold on a second. What's the 0.2%? Like donations?
Yeah, I mean, they sell like Oculus and like they do other stuff. They have like,
so I can say like, who donates to Facebook?
Facebook, what do they have? The glass with the mirror, or but anyway, sorry, continue.
Isn't it 100% ad revenue, dude? Yeah. Like, anyway, keep going. Yeah.
Not quite as diversified as some other companies, but and so like if that's the single focus is like keeping up this ad revenue, it's like what ad revenue is basically the amount of ads that we can serve times the effectiveness of the ad so that we could charge more for that ad. So it's like the amount of ads that we can serve means the growth, the amount of people on and how long do they stay on. And then the other side of the equation is the price of the ad. So it's basically how how well do we know you so that we can serve the correct ad or the correct piece of content so that the person buying the ad achieves the outcome that they want, which is engagement. So like in a way, the more predictable that you could be made as a user, the more valuable you are. So in a weird way, like if you think of the political spectrum, like the economic and social or whatever, it's like everyone's in these little bubbles all over the spectrum. And there's, you know, the Bernie wing, the traditional conservative, the whatever, it's way simplified, but it's like the people that live between the bubbles that are kind of more heterodox thinkers that maybe share some opinions with Bernie, but maybe are more like socially to the right. It's like the algorithms basically try and move everyone from between the bubbles into a bubble, because if you're in a bubble, they better know how you think, they better can predict how you'll react to any piece of content, and that makes you a lot more valuable. So in a weird way, it's not like they are trying to make everyone in these bubbles or make them the same, but the algorithms prioritize for slowly moving people into more predictable groups because that drives up the price of ads. And so in a weird way, it's like that is creating, and the way to do that is kind of make things existential. So politics now has become more existential to where it's like, if this doesn't happen, it's the end of the world, and Trump is a Nazi and Hitler, and Joe Biden is going to bring the socialist revolution. And it's like, it's so ridiculous, but doing that is able to like move people into bubbles and kind of change their personalities in a weird way, which is really not great. And so in a weird way, the business model does. And then also like to compete, all the news organizations now, to get attention, they have to make their content more polemic. And it's like they want to keep their own fan base. So it's like they have to throw out the red meat. The MSNBC has to keep their like champagne liberals happy and do all the stuff that they know that they want, but then also try and draw in some new people, because there's all these independent creators like you guys and other people on YouTube that are competing with them now. So it's like, and the only way to get to win that competition is to make your piece of content crazier or more existential or more not the truth. So that's like the proliferation of fake news, and it's such a big mess, but it's very, very real. And there's no incentive for them to talk about it either. It's like the worst thing that you could do as a political actor or a journalist is ever admit that like you were wrong. Like everyone is so scared to admit that like, oh, we said something wrong about this, or, oh, I had the wrong opinion. So people are forced into like justifying all this crazy stuff that they've said or done. And then that just makes people believe more in this team that they're on, and not have any like introspection to be able to think that like there might be some truth outside of me being on this one team. So it's really fracturing so many things, and it pisses me off because it's like tearing families apart, it's tearing friendships apart, it's dividing society, it's causing people to think that anyone who doesn't think like them are evil, and there's like no incentive to trying to hear from the other side, because the people who would produce that content, it would actually like hurt their jobs if they were to ever like say like, well, I'm an MSNBC reporter, and if I don't toe the party line, it's like they're going to lose their job. So
that's why. Sorry, there's a couple things I want to get into for you. Yeah. One, I wanted, before we gloss over, I think you covered it. I was going to ask any strategies you noticed for taking people and pushing them into, like you said, these more neatly defined bubbles. You said making all politics existential. That's one thing. Is there any other kind of subtle strategies you noticed they would try doing? Like, this one's kind of in the middle, we'll nudge them.
Well, and then dovetail into this. Tell us what strategies there are, but then also what fixes you think they are to abate those negative effects.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't work on the ads team. I don't have any like special insight into like how that works, but it's all like, so Facebook is running, and every tech company is running tens of thousands of experiments at all times on every segment of people, on every product, to be like, okay, well, if we change this or this type of content, this will make like people like, so maybe the friending team, it's like they will friend people more. They'll send more friend requests, which leads to more engagement. Or the login team, and makes it like easier to log in or whatever. Or the newsfeed team wants people to stay on the newsfeed longer and share more things or click on more things. So they're constantly having all these hypotheses of maybe we put this type of content on for this group of people, and if it does lead to more engagement, then like we'll go with that and we'll implement that for everyone. So I mean, it's just that thinking to where everything is about engagement and about all these individual metrics for each team, which essentially are a proxy for engagement that leads to them only caring about moving the needle on engagement.
Of course.
And so it's like, that's never going to go away unless the business model changes, or unless there's some way to like incentivize people like thinking in different ways, or trying to engage with different types of content, or finding the value in like connecting over a controversial issue, and like doing like a Socratic method thing where it's like, okay, you say something correct and then I will, and then we'll go back and forth. But there's no real incentive for that. So in terms of the actual fix for it, I think it would have to be some type of like business model redo, or maybe if these other platforms that are popping up now gain enough traction, like maybe that could force some type of, and it's I don't know if that'll ever happen. I think Facebook's way too powerful for like Parler or like locals.
Well, yeah,
or
but you're
whatever
looking
to,
at
like,
these numbers. Like Cody whipped up a graph that we just saw today.
We're pulling up Parler, for example, because you brought this up a second ago. I thought it was interesting. You were talking about it as before we started the show.
Oh, look at that math shirt. He's finally sporting it. Yeah, there we are. Now he's sporting it.
I was talking with Card, and it was really interesting how Fox News obviously has taken a massive viewer hits, really, and a lot of social media hits, because they kind of they didn't tell their viewers what they tuned in to hear on election night. And not even as far as the results, like they called Arizona early. They just did some things that upset their audience to a degree, where I was looking Newsmax, for example, on YouTube. It's like doubled their, like at 1.5 million from 400,000 in 7 days, because you see these massive moves. And I just want to make sure before we come over, one thing I wanted to get to was, what was the moment for you working in there where you said you were there, you were in Facebook Disneyland, and you decided, I have to move on, I can't do this?
By the way, can we call it Facebook Pleasure Island after the bad place in Pinocchio? Because I like Disneyland. Let's just call it Facebook Pleasure Island.
I just want to make sure we touch on that kind of. When was the moment where you realized, okay, I need to move on, do something else? Like, this is not for me. I understand you've kind of painted a picture of, I could see definitely a company one might want to move off of. But was there like that tipping point of like, wow, this is crazy?
Yeah, it wasn't like a specific moment. It was more like during COVID, I was working remotely, and it's like, this is such a machine that kind of grows on its own. Everything is just like algorithms that so technology is basically find a problem, solve that problem, and then build a repeatable algorithm so that you don't have to solve that problem anymore. You can move on to the next problem and solve that. That's like what tech is. And so it's like, so many algorithms basically do most things that you need to do. And the half of the company is software engineers, and they pretty much do everything. They're the hardest workers. They are unique, very intelligent people that are building this platform. And then the people like me around them, it's like, yeah, we help out. And it's like, for me, it was like, this is such a big company, and I'm getting up every day and like not really doing a lot. And even though I'm not doing a lot, it doesn't really matter. And like, no one knows, no one cares, but we're still hitting our goals. And it's like, I'm just like floating around in this like weird thing where everyone's like justifying what they're doing, but in like bullshit ways, I thought.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was giving me like anxiety. I was like, what am I doing? I need to like work on something that feels like I'm having an actual impact. It's like at the end of each half, everyone writes their statements of impact, and that's how you get judged. You write, it's essentially, how can you sell what you did the best and say that like, here's what I did, so here's my rating, and now I get my bonus. And so, and like a lot of it is literally like, how can you use your sales brain to say that like what I did actually affected this, when in reality, it's like people claim a lot of things that like they didn't really do. I'm not saying this is for everyone. Maybe I'm too cynical, but it just felt like I wanted to go somewhere and build something where I felt like what I was doing was like having an actual impact, because I felt like for a while that just wasn't happening there. And I was like, and it could have just been my role, could have been my potentially negative attitude about it that kept me from wanting to work as hard as I could have. But that was kind of the moment. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, though, you also described a kind of weird atmosphere and culture. Do you think there was any kind of like being out of that, like you said, working remotely, where suddenly it was kind of like it just registered different what you were doing? Do you think that, or was that just kind of just part of working
Yeah.
remotely?
I mean, getting on the bus and going to the office every morning and getting 3 free meals a day and having 20 different restaurants that you could go eat at for free and riding bike around this big campus and having gym there. And I would go and use the Peloton and like work out. And it's like half my day was like not working and just like riding the bike around. And so not having that and being remote during COVID definitely led me to be like, I need to do something where I feel like I'm actually building something or actually like having an impact. So
You literally sound exactly like Matthew B. Crawford, who wrote a book called Shop Class as Soulcraft. It was a New York Times bestseller, and he quit the most prominent political think tank in Washington, D.C. for the exact same reasons you did, and went back to his hometown and became a motorcycle mechanic, where he said, I am not going to take money from other people or any other organization without handing them something in return. And so the book is called Shop Class as Soulcraft. You have to read it. Now, I did have one question that is related to all of this, but is kind of its own thing. What, in your opinion, as you have seen all of these people who would refuse, they'd make the algorithm and then refuse to let their kids use their phone as they went out on their hikes and, all this other stuff. What is the reality of screen time on children and adults? Because you see like Gary Vee, for example, it says, I refuse to believe this is real. I let my kids have as much screen time as they want because they're the future generation of computers. And this is like their language and they're going to conquer the world through computers. Like it's all just a bunch of BS that hippies tell you to try and shame you, just like they used to try and shame you for X, Y, Z thing. And then you also watch like The Social Dilemma, where you're just convinced your child's brain is going to get sucked out of his eyeballs, if he watches 31 minutes instead of 28 minutes of screen time during the day. What is your opinion from the inside of the reality of what the negative effects could be?
Yeah, so I think that it has to do on the individual person. Like there's no one answer. So like the fact that we don't talk about as a society, like personality and like the personality traits that people have and how that affects the way that they think and the way that they like intuit information. So like there are people whose personality where they could like very much moderate how much screen time they use and not let it affect them that much. And then there are people who have different sets of personality traits, like maybe they're more open, they're less conscientious, and it could just completely hijack their brain and completely like control everything about them and lead to a lot of negative externalities. So like, I don't think it's just one answer. Like the whole Gary Vee thing, it's like, yes, like this isn't going to go away. Like this is going to be way more pervasive. And if we want our kids to be able to like understand it and maybe know how to like make it positive in the future, they should maybe be using it more. And like, so, but at the same time, for some people that will have better outcomes, for some people it'll have much worse outcomes. I think we need to like be identifying kids and their like personality type, their neurodiversity, and understanding what tech does to different types of people. And that also goes into like education and like how we should be teaching kids. It's like if we have this very blunt object of like treating everyone the same and not taking into account the way that they think, the way that they react to information, then like that's what we need to be doing, because people are different, and technology and stuff that basically wires your brain affects people to different degrees. So I don't know if I have one answer, whether it's good or not. I think we should try and like limit it, especially like in the more developed world, like in smart ways as much as possible. And there's the whole like data dividend project and ways to kind of like combat the incentives and this ads business model basically. And I guess that could help a little bit. But it's like we need to be talking about it on a deeper level than just like.
Well, yeah. What are some of those fixes? Because I've always thought, well, if you made Facebook a pay instead of an ad based, like a simple piece of legislation, I think to get rid of 90% of the problems that you see in these tech areas is just say, okay, cool, you can't be ad based. Like we have this in radio. Radio, for example. There's different types of stations, and you can pay less for your FCC license. And what'd you say?
Howard Stern. Yeah, I was just
Oh
like,
yeah, you can pay less for your license and get a low power FM license, so you can broadcast around your city if you're a 501c3, for example.
But Carter,
But well, hold on a second. The rule is, I'm just trying to familiarize him with the rule. The rule is, if we're going to sell you that license for cheaper, you know what I'm saying? You can't have a call to action. You can only have sponsorships, people that are willing to give NPR $1 million so that they say this hour was brought to you by X, Y, or Z. On private stations like FM 98.7, you could say, call now today and mention FM 98.7 to get 30% off of your new Hyundai. You know what I'm saying? So do you think there's something similar in terms of legislation where you say like, okay, cool. We know the adverse effects now of social media. And whenever it's ad-based, it just becomes this self-fulfilling negative prophecy that just spirals exponentially out of control. Why don't we make it so that it has to be subscriber-based pay, and then do whatever you want, so that people will be a lot more incentivized to regulate its negative effects because they're paying for it instead of being advertised to for it?
yeah, I think that's definitely a potentially good fix that should be considered. I know that I'm sure Facebook, Twitter, all of them would fight against that because they know that not as many people would use it. And they can always increase the amount of money that they make off of each person through ads a lot better than like increasing the subscription rate that they would get paid. So it's like for them, it would be a net negative by a lot. So it's like I'm sure that they have 1,000 contingency plans from a legal perspective of if that ever came up in Congress, like what they would do, because they have more lawyers than God who have already thought about this stuff very, very deeply. But I think that that's something that should be considered. It's like what, I mean, so one of the things that I really liked about Andrew Yang was when he talked about the American scorecard and like, what are the different measurements that we could implement outside of just GDP and, stock price, shareholder value. Like if those are the only things that people are tied to, then that's the only thing they're going to prioritize. It's the only thing that Facebook will think about. Now, and it seems a little pie in the sky to be like, how can we implement like mental health statistics and other ways? So like if there was some metric where, Facebook was incentivized that if they could somehow measure people's like mental health being better through using their app, and then like that was tied to them getting some type of benefit, then like I think that could be a good way. And it's hard to know exactly what that would be. But we need to start working towards different types of metrics, because if it's just purely profit and ad revenue and bottom line, like the ads business model is so good that it's not going to be able to be changed, especially when there's like no competition. And so we need to start talking about all these things: paid subscription, changing the kind of American scorecard type different metrics. So it's like, I'm just happy that we're putting these things out there because they need to start getting support. We need to start talking about them because there's already going to be a ton of resistance built in to combat it.
Yeah,
so
we'll million march Washington, D.C. and any state capital out there ever, but I've never seen like a 1 million person protest outside of Facebook. And I grew up in the world of big tech,
How about this? I mean, it's a little bit on a little bit moving, I guess, on to some more just discussing some ideas around this. But being in it, and you, Carden, too, you guys are talking about screen time and stuff like this. Just I guess a little bit hypothetically, I do wonder in the future, are we going to start seeing like social media addict support groups? And like, are we sure people that like, I remember I like lost my mind for about 7 years in social media from like 2015 to 2022.
No, that's just called millennials.
Well,
we are the throwaway generation,
but
and I think that's why we're so bad.
Will that become a norm we learn to live with? Or do you think we are seeing maybe some of the growing pains of a new technology being put on us? And do you think maybe 15, 20 years from now we'll look back and say, wow, we just kind of let this thing run wild? Or is this maybe just, just in your opinion, the sign of things to come?
Yeah, I think what you just said, down the line, we are going to look back and be like, holy shit, like these companies grew faster than any companies in the history of the world. Like if you look at the stock market back in like 2000, just like the top 20 most valuable companies, it's all like banks and manufacturing companies and like more traditional stuff. And now it's like all tech companies just kind of out of nowhere. And now they have more power than God. So they have all like the lobbyists and people to combat any like type of this thinking getting anywhere in Congress. Mm-hmm. So but I think we will look back and be like, what the heck happened? I think that support groups, I think that will probably manifest. If anyone, Cardin, if you want your multi-million-dollar business deal, new business to open up, this is something I've thought of for several years now. There's going to be, you're going to have to pay to go into a quiet room and give a guard your phone at the door, and you're gonna have to pay to sit alone without your phone and like read a book. You're literally gonna have to pay for that. I guarantee you. If anyone wants to take that, just credit me.
Well, it's so interesting you say this though, because like me having grown up Mormon, we always had this phrase: "Do not get caught up in the thick of thin things." So from the very beginning of the internet and things like that, there was always a Sunday school lesson once a month that us millennials are kind of grown at, like, here we go again. You know what I'm saying? About saying like, hey, don't forget on Sundays, do Sunday activities like write your grandparents, get off the internet, you know, so on and so forth. So it's funny you mentioned some of these fixes. I want to know if you have any data that would support my anecdotes, because this is 2020 and we prefer to adjust the data to our preconceived notions instead of letting the data drive our conceptions, you know. But I feel like myself, an elder millennial, and many of my friends and many books written by like some of the people that were on The Social Dilemma have said like, okay, this has just gotten nuts. And in the past 20 years, I've just seen how social media has cost me more of my close friendships through politics than it has helped cultivate them, and probably cost me more money through stupid crap I've bought off of Instagram ads impulsively than I could have saved up to buy like the car that I needed or paid off my student loans. So I feel like amongst elder millennials like myself, there's actually been a return. And I've met lots of people that are like, I just plain old deleted Facebook. Instead of paying to go into a room without my phone to read a book, I've just deleted it. Or like me, I deleted my Facebook profile just so that like whatever 60 days of erasing all my messages and everything would be over with. And then just started a new one that's much more specific to just my immediate friends and family, and not the plethora of every person I've met in an airport as I've traveled the world over the past 20 years. So is there any data that actually suggests as most things are cyclical, you know what I'm saying? Like bell bottoms had their heyday in 1968. They didn't quite go away until 1982, you know what I'm saying? But it was definitely a downward trend. Is there anything that shows that the strength and the power of the great monolith of Facebook and the great monolith of Instagram or big tech as a whole, is there anything that shows, at least in America or in the developed world, that now there actually is a point where the populace has figured out, okay, this causes more problems than benefits, and actually has started tapering down? Is there anything that suggests my anecdote is real?
The anecdote of like, we're now seeing more negative externalities, or the anecdote
and we're quitting it. Like we're quitting it, or we're regulating it, or we're tapering our use voluntarily as people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's tough to know that. I mean, Facebook continues to grow. Their engagement numbers continue to grow. I think like most people don't have the like will or ability just to be able to quit as easily as someone like with your mentality. So, you know, kudos to you. And
thank you.
but I think that I don't know of any data that like really shows that. Like, I mean, I think in the last earnings report, it does show that like the user growth in like US, Canada, it's like slightly goes down, but it's not significant enough to see like a mass exodus of people leaving. There are and like if there is any of that, it will be made up for with the people who are more addicted to it becoming that much more addicted to it. Like they will be able to shift and be like, okay, we're losing some people. Well, we're gonna engage like more viciously engage the more engageable people, and to make up that like
or we can make it like the Hunger Games, you know, the more hours of screen time you have, the sooner you are to go into the arena, just like the little food chips that they got. No, just
well, but this is one question I have a little bit too, and I wonder you said a lot, it's just so algorithmically based over there in Facebook, and I wonder, let me weigh your opinion on this, right? How much of this is intentional and unintentional, do you think? Like if the but if the algorithms are unintentionally just selecting for, you know, moving users together, I mean, is there any intelligence, you think, knowing that they're fracturing people, or is it just oh, we make more money when we move the users into little circles. Do you think that's what's going on under the hood? In which case, like, if it's just kind of unintentional, how do you direct it?
Yeah, I don't think it started out as like intentional. I think it, no one could have foreseen like the situation that we're in now and like the trajectory of where it's going to go. I'm sure that they're aware of it internally. So like whenever this gets brought up, Facebook always trots out this one stat where it's like, we removed something like $500 million 500 million hours of like engagement on like non-beneficial posts. So they are able to categorize posts as like healthy posts or things that are like not as healthy. Like there's like positive engagement, negative engagement.
That literally sounds like 1984.
Where it's like we voluntarily removed all this negative engagement. I'm sure like in the whole scheme of things, it was like such a drop in the bucket, and it was just kind of like a marketing thing to be able to say. But the way that they categorize like positive versus negative engagement, I don't think that they really, it's my opinion that like they don't work hard enough on that. I would bet that probably in the background right now, they are realizing this, and they're trying to come out with something that they can do like a campaign around. That's like, we realize this is a problem. We want to make engagement like better and like get people to interact with others and not demonize people. I'm sure that they're like working on some solution to that, but it's like any solution they come out with always gets hijacked in favor of engagement because they have to meet that bottom line, and more engagement usually means more, almost always means more like polemic and like crazy engagement. And that's kind of what the algorithms like select for. So it's not really like we need to turn up there's a person turning that dial like they showed in the movie. There's like people sitting there. It's like, it's not like that insidious, but it's, they all have to hit their goals, each team. And if their goals are this amount of engagement, then they're going to do experiments that find ways to raise engagement and then roll that out to like everyone. And those experiments you probably will select for more polemical type engagement. And so it's, I'm sure they're thinking about in the background, like they're not terrible people, but I don't know how well it's going to end up working if they're always just tied to this one metric.
And then, so I guess just one quick follow-up on that too as well. Do you foresee then, kind of along that lines, do you foresee ever any kind of just maybe market opening coming up where it would be a positive for Facebook and these companies to turn around and start internally policing like you said, kind of implement some countermeasures? Or is it really kind of be realistically, it's going to have to be external? Internally, it's always going to benefit Facebook to fracture its users, generate more users, and increase the advertising base. Is that just kind of as the market seems to be built now? Or do you see a future where maybe they could somehow benefit from better policing that? Or is it just kind of never in their interest?
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing and was just going to ask you, can it be profitable and beneficial at the same time?
Yeah, I would hope that that's true. I don't know. I think that there might need to be some type of external, whether regulation or structures in place that create that incentive. It's just, it plays on our worst instincts as humans, and we're all flawed people, and we all react more to negative things than to positive things. Unfortunately, we've all been trained to do that as well. So it's like, that's what we're used to. So like positive engagement and stories, like don't make anyone money. And they've all gotten used to that way of producing it. And we've all gotten used to that way of like consuming it. And so it's like, it would be, I think we're all way too programmed to be able to like flip that switch and all like revel in good things and revel in, changing our views to be like more inclusive of other people, even though everyone is obsessed with saying how inclusive they are. And like, it's tough because
I prefer thinking half of America is stupid and I am better, mostly because of a shared belief in cyberspace.
Well, hold on, one second.
That I can judge others for.
1 second, Cody. Before we get off this, there was one follow-up I wanted to just one last follow-up I wanted to put on it, and that was with to your point of how it's just profitable to move them away. Do you see, I mean, your point, like Parler is the #1 app on the App Store, but again, Facebook's building internet in third world countries to increase their user base. I don't think Parler's doing that, right? Like, they're not going to catch up. But if that does happen, where this just fracturing and polarization does start kind of backfiring, what, and again, speculative, what do you think would be, like, if Facebook did start to notice we fractured people too far, they're leaving us, What would be the recourse for that? I mean, is there an off switch at this point, or is it just the ball's rolling, you think?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like the parlors of the world are all cropping up around like a specific bubble, basically. So it's maybe more like the right wing, the however you want to categorize that, So maybe like some bubbles can be like pulled off into their own types of platforms, but that's then gonna put a cap on like how many people they could get. And it's tough to know how like Facebook could combat that. But
It's almost
I
like they
think that
build
that
the
is a way
markets,
to
right?
like,
It's like it's like they're building the markets they're going to be competing with by driving these users in a weird
by
way.
driving people out. Yeah. So maybe that would be an incentive for them to like lower the temperature on things to like keep people from leaving. And I mean, so there's like Facebook, there's Instagram, there's like, WhatsApp, and there's, so each of them is like differently nuanced, of course. But it seems like a fracturing could take place slowly. But the amount of just like smart people working there and like lawyers and people thinking about all of this and writing contingency plans, it's like they are all over this. I know. And it's like whatever happens, like for any possible situation or future, it's like they already know the best outcome of what they could do. So it's kind of like whatever ends up happening, they will still suck the most value out of it as possible.
No, I'll tell you what's happening. It will become self-aware in 2035. We'll have to rise up in the ashes of Los Angeles, fighting the bots like Terminator 7, except for it's really Facebook. And by that time, Elon Musk will have gotten his half-human, half-computer thing, and Mark Zuckerberg will be the head of Cyberdyne, but an 89-year-old dude. I'm looking forward to this, dog. I'm not lamenting this. I'm looking forward to who's the guy in Terminator. Come on, Cody, you're the pop culture guy. Not John Wick. That's a totally different movie franchise.
I was thinking of John Connor, but
John Connor.
Either way, yes.
Cody Hill is the John Connor. That's what's going on. All right, so I mean, I am spent, dog, thinking that I've just fried my brain. You know what I'm saying? And that we all need to storm the Bastille in Menlo Park. All right. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, no, I can't say that. Big tech buddies at YouTube will be like, hey, did you hear what they said on Problem Solving Politics about you Facebook friends? You know what I'm saying? But what's the final moral of the story? My last question is for you and everything you've learned through, the emotional and the intellectual exercise of being in the Yang Gang and also having been in Facebook. What's the moral of the story? Yeah. What's the big takeaway from this interview for somebody?
Yeah. So I think the moral of the story for me, it's like it's all about incentives. And I think that with the incentive for all of the people who understand tech and who, are economic actors good enough to go like work in big tech and like solve problems, to me, it's like all of our best problem solvers are going into like the most profitable industries, into tech, into finance, and basically perpetuating this type of world. And for me, it's like we need to start making things like politics more and like societal change type things like more attractive to people who want to go in and solve problems. That was one of the reasons why I quit and joined startup Upstate North Carolina. It's like we need to show that like tech could have such a more incrementally beneficial value on impacting like politics and all the industries surrounding politics, so that it becomes more transparent, so that people actually get engaged with what's going on and understand that like what is the legislative process and like how does it work and how can I as a citizen get involved, and especially also on like another big thing is like local and like state level. It's like everyone is sitting out there hypnotized by this national theater going on, and this is all theater. And politics is literally like almost 100% theater, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so if we can just get people caring about the state that they live in, their neighborhood, who they live around, the people around them, and like what's going on, as opposed to just living in this online world and being distracted by this very profitable entertainment theater going on, then like I think that is a way to like just get people from caring as much about being glued to these devices. And we just need to start talking about this stuff more and like talking about it in a way that people begin to understand and And like this business model is just driving people apart, and it shouldn't be that way. They're like the most progressive, empathetic people in the world who care about other people who now are like literally acting in that exact opposite way. And they will like never know it. So it's a very hard problem to solve, but we need to start talking about it more, and we need to stop incentivizing all of our best problem solvers going in to make tech better for like the communication world. It's like, if you think about industries to be disrupted, like politics is so backwards and slow and non-transparent that like even like a little bit of tech can make a world of difference and get people more engaged. But everyone is flocking to disrupting like the efficiency of communication with all the apps and all the social stuff. It's like all that's doing is like making us more miserable. But all the well-paid, smart problem solver people, I'm not saying there's not in other industries, but a lot of these like, MBA grads and people from top schools, they're all like flocking there because that's like where they can get the most benefit out of. And it's I don't know. I think we just need to start talking about it more in general, and understanding like what it's doing to us, and saying that like this isn't right, and we need to start talking about potential fixes. Like we're not going to get there on the first time. You need to like test and learn. You need to try some things, find out what's wrong with them, and then pivot and change those things. But we're not even like talking about those things nationally now. So.
Well, I guess you could say, right, the first step is admitting we have a problem as a country with social media. And I agree. But last thing, Matt, I just want you to let everyone know again, you're the organization or the group you're working with, and kind of what you're doing before we wrap up here. Let people know what you're working on now.
Yeah. So like I just said, like, where can tech most disrupt to add more value? Everyone's flocking to the communication world. To me, it's like, what is the least sexy industry that tech has not touched? And to me, it was so obvious that it was basically politics and like everything surrounding the government. If you think internally at the government, all their systems are still from like the 70s. They move so slow. Everyone knows how efficient they are. I don't think that that's ever really going to change. So the company that I'm working for kind of is on the outside with nonprofits and state associations and lawyers that like work with the government to bring transparency to state legislation. So it's on the state level. It's called Upstate NC. And what we do is we do legislation tracking and advocacy and basically bill analysis for the North Carolina General Assembly. So because a lot of times legislation gets proposed like early in the day, and then it gets changed in the afternoon, and then it gets voted on that evening. And a lot of things go through without people who it affects, without them knowing what the heck is going on. So like a lot of times, like entire industries will change and through legislation, and people will be unaware because they didn't know it was happening. So there's a lot of like backroom dealing, old boys clubs. They try and keep things non-transparent kind of on purpose. And so we basically are able to update you with anything that happens to any bill that you care about within 10 minutes of it happening. And then we have this analysis software that shows the new versions of bills and exactly what changed. And then we give you a platform to do advocacy campaigns, to contact legislators to say like, hey, we don't like this. We have 100 people that are going to write you emails and put pressure on you, because that's really the only way that
is awesome.
Is when they get pressure.
That is awesome. Second in line, can you come to California? The Structural Pest Control Act was written in 1974, and we still have to fill out snail mail pieces of paper, PDFs that you print out online and mail, like just the licensing process alone.
Also, talk about like state legislators. California's how many assembly people? But anyway, very cool. Name the organization one more time. I want to make sure I can have the link.
It's Upstate NC. You can go to start.keepupstate.com if you want to check it out. If you know anyone who's in nonprofits or state associations in North Carolina, feel free to reach out to me.
So Cody Hill for president 2032.
Cardin makes everyone president. Everyone's president in Cardin's world.
Cody Hill for president may not be of the United States. We might have to secede. Yeah. But in the tech tyranny,
the Western States Union.
Yeah, in the Western States Union, Cody Hill for president 2024. Thank you very much for coming on the show today, Cody. This was awesome. It's been real, and it's been fun, and it's been real fun. This is Problem Solver Politics. See you guys in the next video.